or two, we're going to be finding out more about system dynamics, including real examples of models which use this approach. And our presenters today are Douglas McKelvie, who is our Cement. That. What? Why did
Symmetric.
I didn't practice that. But you're currently working with the strategy unit, so I'm much more familiar with that. And Hannah Wilson, who is an analyst at the strategy team at the Mersey Care Foundation Trust, and Stacey Croft and Sally Thompson, who are both from the strategy unit. So I'm going to be handing over to them in a moment or two. So I've just pressed record. We're recording these sessions and I've told you where you can find them. We're going to finish about 12 today or just before. If you have any questions or comments throughout, please use the chat box or just shout out. And I'm also going to be putting a generic questions for our presenters on Menti in a minute or two. We're going to have a lot of fun with Menti today. Douglas and I have been conniving some interaction with you, which we hope will go smoothly, and we know that you will be very kind to us if it doesn't. I'm sure it will. I'm very positive about that. So keep yourself on mute if you want to say anything, so we can get most out of the session. And as always, these sessions are informal, but hopefully as informative as they possibly can be. But before we kick off, we would I'd like you to just go over to menti.com, and I will share my screen so that you can see the number, which is 9867 9783. Sorry, 9867 9683. Just to prove that, I'll just put that in the chat for those who can see the chat. And I will also go over to Menti so you can be able to see it that way too, which makes sense. I always forget that makes sense to do it like that. And I've changed it. Look, for those, I've changed it a little bit. It's a bit more MDSN-y now, a little bit more green, a bit like my cardi. So there we go. If you could go to menti.com and or click on the link and go to 9867 7683. Oh, all those hearts. I do like the hearts. Everything is fine. That's good. Good to see. So we've got lots of people arriving. Just I'll let you do that for a minute or two, and then we'll just move on to asking you who you are. So if you could just say your name and your role, that'd be great. I'd just love to know who's here today and what type of job you have. I'm anticipating we'll have a few analysts in the audience today, predominantly analysts as part of the Midlands Analyst Network, but we get lots of people coming to these sessions, and they are open to people even if they're not part of that network, because we quite often cover topics which aren't necessarily for analysts specifically, but are general interests. So we have analysts, we have data scientists, we have senior analysts, we have Douglas and Craig and Sarah and Zach, and Michael and Hannah. I can read, and Rob and Stacey, of course. Chen Yu, lovely to see you, Chen Yu. Claire. Perfect. Modelling and simulation. Excellent. So now we want to know which organisation you work for. There's no significance of the flowers I have on my screen. I like sunflowers. Unit, excellent. My colleagues, CCG's super. Plenty of local authority representation as usual. Cute hospitals, that's good. Health economic unit. No hit, perfect. Got plenty of people. Good coverage there. It's great to see. Just a couple of little gaps, but that's because I think it's not clear what that means. That's my fault. Okay, so now I won't move on to the next slide because that will spoil the surprise, but I will hand over to Douglas. Would you like to take over?
Okay. And You should see a white screen.
Yes.
Okay. So hello everyone, and what we're going to do this morning is give a very brief introduction to system dynamic modeling. So I'm going to show you one or two introductory things, which is not a full explanation, but just to give you an idea of some of the concepts. And then Hannah is going to describe some project work that she's done, having been just introduced to system dynamics last autumn. So this is Hannah's first system dynamics project, based on having had minimal training in it. So I'm sure you'll be impressed by what Hannah's been able to do with the learning that she had. And then after that, we've got a small model that you can play with. So it really is as exciting as that. Maybe not quite as exciting as Rachel's Mentee, but there we go. So just to, so I'm Douglas McKelvie. I work independently. I had a background in social work, and now I do modelling and simulation, working with the strategy unit. Just to keep the excitement levels high, this presentation contains scenes of iteration. So an interesting paper from somebody called Jack Homer, who's a leading system dynamics modeler, called Why We Iterate. And I think this is quite a good quote to start with. He says, what's so great about system dynamics? What will we get that we can't get from other methods? And he tells them that system dynamics is the one method that will allow them to make all of your assumptions explicit, integrate them in a logical and testable way, will challenge the assumptions, provide a broader perspective, and put clients in a better position to make decisions that will stand the test of time. So that's quite a claim, actually. But we'll see how we get on with that. Let's get on to something a bit more straightforward, which is a graph. So on the right-hand side, there is a graph plotting behavior over time, starting at 9 o'clock in the morning and finishing at 7 o'clock in the evening. Two lines plotted in the graph. The blue line plots the number of people entering a shop, and the red line represents the number of people leaving a shop. And you're going to go to Mentee, back to Mentee very soon. And there are four questions to answer very quickly. So question one is, when did the largest number enter the store? Then second question, when did the largest number leave the store? Third question, when were there most people in the store? And finally, when were there fewest people in the store? And all you have to do on Mentee is just give an answer, or say if you think that the question cannot be answered. A couple of things to note. It's possible that the shop opened before 9 o'clock, and it's possible that the shop closed after 7 o'clock. So you shouldn't assume anything about that. And the other thing is that if any of these questions look incredibly easy, then that might be because they are. So we're not trying to trick you. So if a question looks really easy, then just feel free to answer it, and don't look for the catch. So Rachel, where are we on Mentee? What question can people answer?
Question number one.
Okay, so if you'd like to answer question number one, when did the largest number enter?
Of course, I'm not sharing the results at the moment, am I?
No,
Douglas.
no,
So this is actually fun.
Yes.
Because I can see them and you can't.
Oh, right. Are we getting some results, Rachel?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Have we got enough results, do you think?
No, not yet. I need just a few more.
People are waiting in the lobby.
I know. Well, whoever's coming in now won't know the number. They won't know how to, because they won't be able to see the chat, so they'll need a reminder. Ooh.
Well, it's actually displayed on the top right-hand corner of my screen. So
well, that's perfect. So whoever is just joining or has recently joined, if you go to mentee.com and type in 98677683, you can join in the fun.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've got most people who are in the room have contributed so far. So I'd say about 80%.
Let's try question 2. So when did the largest number leave? If you didn't manage to answer question 1, don't worry, you can still do question 2.
I think if people join, they can probably catch up. So you
They
can
can
probably,
figure out, yes.
yeah, you can move through the questions.
Yeah.
If they join at the beginning, you can catch up, get up to speed.
Yeah. We just need a sample of answers, really, don't we?
Yeah.
Still people coming, waiting in the lobby. Obviously, news is out about what exciting things.
I know.
Suddenly decide to come to this meeting after all. That's my interpretation, anyway.
Yeah. We do have a couple, because we're analysts and we fit. Some people feel they need more information. You can imagine that there are some people who would be clicking on that from this audience. We should 100% anticipate. Okay, well, we have a similar number of responses for that one. Should we move on to the third of these 4 questions?
So question 3 is, when were there most people in the store? When were there most people in the store? Okay, that should be on Menti now.
Yes. More people are thinking about it, Douglas. I was going to say there isn't a right and wrong answer, but there probably is a wrong answer. Like most people in the store, 7 o'clock is probably not a great, unless they've got locked in. Oh, I don't know.
Yeah,
the door's shut.
Or not.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think we've got a good response from that one. So should we move on to the final question?
Well, the final question, you'll be glad to know, folks, no more questions after this. When were there fewest people in the store? When was the smallest number?
So like Douglas says, they're not trick questions. It's just like, what do you think about a department store? When do you think there would be the fewest number of people in that store, that shop?
Based on the graphs.
Okay.
Okay, Rachel.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
So next, yeah, exactly. So next steps, I'm just going to I've got to stop Menti. So it's nothing you've done. I'm not quite sure what happens if you're sort of a voter. So I've just got to stop it. I've got to just get those results out and turn them into something marvelous. So Douglas can talk about them in a few minutes or so. So I'll do that now.
I'm just going to move on slightly in this presentation, and I'm going to get into my model of this graph, I think. So bear with me. So this is a slightly different graphic from the one that Rachel showed earlier, because what I didn't say is I live in Edinburgh, so that's what a shop looks like in Edinburgh. Well, and then COVID came along, and now that's going to be a hotel, I think. But that was the department store. It probably has many more customers than were on my graph, and I'm going to show you a model that I made of the questions that we were answering. How are we doing, Rachel?
Yeah, I'll just need about 2 minutes to get this done. I shall let you know when I'm done.
Okay.
I haven't disappeared.
Right. Okay. So if I just sort of move on now, and you'll see that I've recreated that graph here, but in the form of an actual model. So if I run the model, then you can see it's a slightly different proportions in the graph, but that's people entering and leaving the store. And there we go. So really these questions were about how easy it is for people to read graphs. And in system dynamics, we're always looking at behavior over time graphs. That's like our currency. And any minute now, we'll discover how well you got on in this. So, am I right in thinking there isn't a chat function here, Rachel?
There is. I think a few people can use chat, but I think I did a poll once, and around about 40 or 50% of people can,
yeah,
and others can't. So
yeah.
I'm just cutting and pasting a few bits of.
Okay. Right, so I'll let you do that, Rachel, and stop asking you things. You just
no, it's fine. I can actually do this and talk to you at the same time.
Yeah, I can't. So I can only do one thing at a time at the most. But I'm going to start with question 1, and we'll see what people guessed. But hopefully, people followed the blue line of people entering and said when the largest number entered was simply at the top of this line. I did say that some of the questions were easy. So when we come to see the results, hopefully we'll see a lot of people would have got the right answer here, that the largest number entered at that time.
Okay, well, I think I'm done with cutting and pasting now. So let's see if I can.
Do you want to?
Yeah, I can share my screen.
Yeah. Okay. Wow.
I know.
So, right.
How's that for consistency?
Very good. So let's look at the most leaving then, because people are obviously managing that quite straightforwardly. So, and again, this is an audience of analysts, and you can see what happens. Okay, when we're the highest number in the store, what question 3 is more interesting. Right, and that is
divide.
That is excellent. So so there's 2 competing answers there. Let's look at the lowest in the store, and then we'll come back to the highest in the store.
People want more info, look, Douglas.
Can we go back to highest in the store? How many wanted more info there? So 2 people wanted more info out of quite a large number of people, so that's quite small. Right. So basically, the highest number got the right answer, which is great, which is at 1 o'clock. And there was also quite a number of people who went for 12 o'clock. And without prolonging any sort of discussion about this, the reason for that is that what people were looking at there is almost certainly the gap between the lines. So they were saying, when is the biggest gap between people entering and leaving? And that's probably when there were most people in the store. Other people thought it was when the lines crossed, and I'll show you in my model why that's the right answer. And then to look at the lowest in the store, then that's the so Rachel, could you look at the lowest in store? Then again, well, actually, what's interesting, can we go back to the highest in store? So I'm just checking out the so the numbers, the actual numbers are sort of 8 and 7, and if we look at the most entering, then so roughly the same number of people answered, and there's quite a lot of people in the meeting, I think, who didn't answer. Is that right? Anyway, so can I I'll start sharing my screen now, Rachel, and thank you very much for showing us the results. So in the model, which I just ran, I'll do it again. You can see that starting at the beginning, there's always more people going in than leaving in the first part of the day, and then we reach this point in the middle of the day, and after that point there's always more people leaving than entering. So therefore the total number of people in the store, it must be rising from that period, and it must be falling for the period after. And as long as you can see that the area between these 2 lines is much bigger in terms of the net exits, compared with the net entrances, then there must be fewer people in the store at the end. So it seemed that for the highest number, just over half people got that right, and a number of people looked at the gap between the lines and used something called what we would call the correlation heuristic. And then for the number leaving, there were similar a few guesses in these other places, but probably most people actually got that was when the smallest number. And if I show what the number in the store was based on these lines, then if I run the model again, a shaded area should appear, and you can see that the grey area represents total number in the store. It rises until the lines cross, and then it falls. Sometimes people want more information. They say, I need to know how many were in the shop at the beginning, and that would make a difference to my calculations. So I've got a slider here that shows the initial number of people in the store, which I've set here at 200. And you can see if I put that number up, then the whole graph changes. So we've still got the highest number here and the lowest number there. So the only time it becomes slightly problematic is that if I had a very small number in the store at the beginning, there wouldn't be enough people to exit. And so you can see what happens to the leaving line as it then gets overridden by the model, because that once you get lower than that number, then it would be impossible for all these numbers to leave over on the original graph. So that's here we're looking at data. The point of models is to look at structure, and I'm having some difficulty here in moving my screen. So in system dynamics, we differentiate between stocks and flows. The two questions on the graphs were about flows, the number going in and the number coming out, and the questions 1 and questions 2 were about the number going in and the number going out. Question 3 and 4 were about the stock. And the stock basically changes as a result of the inflow and the outflow. And why that's important in health and social care, and I'm going to go over to Hannah in a couple of minutes, Hannah, so be ready, is that we encounter stocks and flows all the time. That's our people in the store, but that might be our waiting list, which has an inflow of referrals and an outflow of people going to treatment. Or it might be service users, which has an inflow of admissions and an outflow of discharges. Or it could be our bank balance, which has an inflow of income and an outflow of expenditure. A couple of things to notice about that. One is very important, that a stock can only change if its inflows or outflows change. So if you have a certain amount of money in the bank, you can't just say, I would like to have a different amount of money in the bank. What you could do is possibly earn a different amount of money, but that might be within the gift of other people. Or you could possibly spend a different amount of money. And if you did that, then you could have a different amount of money in the bank, but you can only change the stock by changing its flows. And that's what the logic of our models. Relating it to the jobs that we do here then is the challenge is that when we're exploring data, are we sufficiently curious about discovering which variables we're dealing with are stocks, which are flows, and which are the, if you like, auxiliary variables, and also how much attention do we pay to the connections between variables. So if I quickly move out of that and back here, then I'm just going to show you this picture of an actual model, and I'm not going to explain any of that now because we're slightly behind time. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Hannah, and she will explain how she has used this stock and flow and simulation type of thinking to look at some real life examples in Mersey Care. So Hannah, if you're ready, then I will take my screen down and pass on to you.
Sure thing. Thanks, Douglas. So yeah, I'm Hannah. I'm an analyst working at Mersey Care. We're a mental health and community provider in the Northwest, so a little bit of an intruder in this Midlands network, but you've been kind enough to let us join and share our work today. So I'm going to share my screen in a moment, but just a little bit of context before I start. So we started looking at system dynamics. We still do have some very ambitious goals for system dynamics, which was, can we use this modelling technique to look at flows, in this case of patients, through a respiratory pathway? So that might be for an acute respiratory condition with just a hospital stay and a recovery, or it might be for a long-term respiratory condition where that care pathway can span years of somebody's life. And so we thought system dynamics would be a really good way to look at how all these different services, different geographies, different locations would play into the respiratory pathway as a whole. That was obviously very ambitious and very large. So what we've started with and what I'm going to show you today is a couple of smaller pilot models that we built looking at two, I think I'll probably just show you one actually, but we looked at two areas of respiratory care that Mersey Care currently offer. One is a community respiratory team, which I'm going to start with, and then the other is respiratory focused telehealth services, where we have a long-term condition management pathway, and then we also have a growing service area of virtual wards for respiratory. So I will share my screen now, and I'm going to start with this community respiratory team. So I think Douglas is maybe going to talk about this a little bit more after I've finished, but I think one of the big things that we've learned about system dynamics, hopefully you can all see that now, is that system dynamics is about understanding what is there in the first place and turning it into a model. So perhaps more so than other forms of analysis, it really, really depends on those conversations and that group model building with the operational and the clinical staff who run that service. So we started this piece of work by saying, hello, you're the community respiratory services, what do you do? And very simply, there were three main areas of this service. So there's a 2-hour urgent response to patients who need an intervention for their respiratory condition immediately. There is a hospital at home pathway, and so this is where your condition is managed in your home, typically for 2-3 weeks, just when you need that extra care. And then there's the community clinics, which run scheduled appointments, and that could be a pulmonary rehabilitation, it could be a smoking cessation clinic. And that generally is what this team offers, and they're all specialist respiratory services. And actually, from conversations, we decided that a model, a system dynamics model, might be useful to look at demand and capacity. So we've got a certain number of staff. Could we expand the service? Are we at our limits? How can we offer this service safely, given the number of staff that we have? And then the impact of telehealth. So this is all delivered in person at the moment. This hospital at home is somebody coming and visiting you in your home and delivering care. If we were to introduce telehealth alternatives, how would that then again affect the demand and the capacity and the flow through this pathway? And so given that those were our questions, we've actually omitted community clinics from the scope for now. This is a multidisciplinary team who offer this. We've got physios, we've got all sorts of different staff groups contributing to these clinics, which made it a little bit more complex. And it's also, I guess, there's an element of the planned nature to these clinics, whereas the other services are much more unplanned. So what we've done in this piece of work is look at the first two services, which are both staffed by the same pool of nurses who have to manage a 2-hour response service and look after a caseload of hospital at home patients. So there was obviously a lot more that we could do with this, but I think we tried to keep it simple to start with by looking at the two different services and remembering that these were our key aims. So this, Douglas was showing you earlier, the department store model. This is the software that we've used. It's called Stella, and it allows you to build this kind of interface. So I'm going to show you these interactive dashboards in a second. But I guess behind the scenes, the model building in Stella looks a bit more like this. And so I'm aware this might be quite small on people's screens, especially all of the labels. Don't worry, I've only got 5 minutes, so I'm not going to expect you to look through all of the labels in detail. But this is a brief description of how we built the model, and again, emphasizing that this was built in an iterative manner in conversation with the teams. So we decided that, as you've seen from Douglas's, the rectangles are stocks, and then the arrows are the flows. So we decided that our main stocks and flows that we were looking at in this case were people waiting for, using and then being discharged from the hospital at home pathway. The discharge is determined by length of stay. The enrolment or the admittance to the hospital at home is governed by demand and by capacity, which I'll go into in a second. And then the demand in this case has two forms. You're either referred to hospital at home as a route of early supported discharge from hospital, or because you've just received an urgent intervention and you need monitoring and following up for the next 2 weeks. So we decided that this was our key backbone of the stocks and flows. As I just mentioned, we need to look at capacity. So we built this at the top and we started to look at all of these auxiliary variables, as Douglas mentioned. So it might be how many shifts are available per week, what percentage of our staff are we going to allocate to one service or to the other, what's our maximum capacity per staff member. And this actually raised some really interesting questions. I think Douglas used the phrase earlier about challenging assumptions. So this really raised some conversations about safe staffing levels and are there numbers for that, or is it built in other ways? So that was really interesting. But if I just skip through here, we put all of these variables in, we make some assumptions, and we end up getting capacities based on staff numbers. Oh, we could have made it even more complex and started to look at geographies. Obviously, if staff are having to travel out to houses, you have all of these impacts on efficiency of travel time. It might be that if you were to massively increase the size of your team, the efficiency therefore improves. But we didn't do anything with this for now, but I think it shows the potential of system dynamics, doesn't it? And then we've obviously got, I think what I haven't mentioned yet so far is this urgent response service. So this was then an interesting question about timelines. So as Douglas said, system dynamics is a model looking at the effects of something over time. The hospital at home service has a length of stay of weeks. Urgent response service happens end to end within 2 hours. So what we decided to do in this case is represent everything to do with that urgent response service only via these auxiliary variables. So we don't have stocks and flows for these because it's not something that's accumulating over time. What does accumulate over time is the referrals from that service into hospital at home. So this is all then at the top describing the 2-hour response service. We've got some extra bits that we build in here to try and define the capacity. We look at waiting list balancing. Inside all of these ones with the rounded corners, there's even more diagrams. So there's quite a lot that goes into this. But I think the main thing I want you to look at is the fact that we've got these stock and flow architectures at the bottom here. So if I go back now briefly, once you've built that model, the second part, so the first part is having the conversations and deciding what to build. The second part then is producing some outputs from that. And in Stella, in this software, that comes in the form of an interactive dashboard. There's various things that you can do, but we chose to build this kind of dashboard. So again, just in a few minutes, a quick whistle-stop tour through some of this. So we've got a tab here that describes staff and shifts. And as you saw earlier, you can use these sliders. Oh, I actually need to set it going, don't I? Live. So at the moment, I know it's over 2 years. Nothing's changing over the 2 years here, but hopefully you can see the impact of me reducing the size of my team in total, or of changing the proportion that I choose to divide my staff allocation between the two services. We can look at things like holiday and training, non-clinical commitments. We can look at shifts per week, maximum capacities per nurse. And once we've decided that this best reflects the situation that we've got or that we want to have, we can then start to look at how this affects our capacity to deal with referrals. So if I've got two tabs here, one for the 2-hour response. And so we can look at capacity in the dashed line here versus the demand in the solid blue line. And we can see that at the moment we're operating well within capacity. If we were to artificially move this right the way up, you can see that you reach a point, if you exceed in capacity, you then start to have those urgent referrals that are missed in this case, because that would be a patient who goes to hospital instead, like most likely. We can start to add some variation. So we're not really going to have 6 people every single day, are we? So we can start to add some variation. Here I've set it so you can just manually sketch on. You could have also imported real data into here to match what you actually see. We've also got things, so we could just as a headline figure to look at your percentage utilization. That would be something that might be quite useful to know. And then if we move to the hospital at home tab, we've got something very similar here. And in fact, that's because I put this up, isn't it? Let's put this back down. Hospital at home. You can now see that we're again operating within capacity. We can change things like length of stay and see how that impacts. We could change the number of the percentage of 2-hour responses that then move on to the hospital at home. So we're assuming most of them here. It might not be most of them. We can change the referrals from hospital, from that early supported discharge. And we can start to look at things like waiting list priorities. So are we going to say we'll admit proportionally from those who are waiting in hospital and those who are waiting at home? Or do we say those in hospital are actually already in a place of care, so they take lower priority? So we can simulate scenarios like that. And then I guess this now comes to our second question. If you remember the two that we had one that was looking at that demand and capacity and one that looked at the impact of telehealth. And at the moment, all we've said is you would have to suggest, wouldn't you? How much do you think your capacity per nurse could be increased if some of those hospital at home appointments were able to be done remotely? And so then you can see here, even if you were only to increase by half a patient per shift, suddenly you're then within capacity again. So I think it's a really powerful way to show the impact of perhaps a small change in one area of the system can result in a large impact elsewhere in the system. And it's a really good, it's a storytelling technique, isn't it? Both in the building of the model and then in the using of the model with dashboards in the end. So I think I'll stop there. Briefly, we did do something similar for telehealth, and here we were looking at that balance between a long-term pathway and a virtual ward. And very similarly, we built these kind of dashboards, and we started to look at how, if you reach capacity, so I'll just move it right up here, can you then start to look at coping strategies? So what would happen if we reduced some lengths of stay? Would that allow us to eliminate our waiting list and operate within capacity? And in this case, yes, it did. But yeah, as I say, probably not enough time to go through that one today, but I think it's been a really interesting exercise. It's gone down well with staff so far at Mersey Care. I think they're very used to perhaps encountering analysis in much more of an operational day-to-day kind of way of being asked to submit data every day and that feeling like a burden. I think this has been a really refreshing new way of using analysis to perhaps understand things a bit differently and to look more strategically in the long term. So I think that's it from me. I'll hand back over to Douglas, but I'm happy to take questions at the end as well.
I think suggest, Rachel, that we should maybe move to questions just now. We've got some other things that we could show you if there are no questions. But I think appreciate what Hannah's just presented to us, and I'm sure that people would want to ask something about what they heard there or what they heard earlier.
Okay, so what I've done is I've skipped the fun let's play screen on Menti, so I've moved it onto the screen which allows people who can't put in the chat box, and in fact some people can't talk either. So I feel very mean to some people in this session. So we do have we'll people can put their questions there. They can talk if they want to, of course.
Yeah.
So I'll just jump in with some of my own while we allow people to think through some of the things. Thanks ever so much for that, Hannah. That was really interesting. I have some sort of limited experience of system dynamics myself. And the things that appealed to me, and which I can see that you've played out in what you've done there, and if you ended with it really, is like the storytelling bit of it. I think what really appealed to me as something I really wanted to invest time in, sort of trying to find out more about and how to do it, was the fact that it seemed to be so sort of open and clear and visible to people who don't normally do data. They don't really, and sometimes you can present a model and you can show inputs and you can show outputs, but I think it's a bit clearer to people because they can see the pathway, they can see where they fit. You know, if it's people, you know, like you say, they've been asked to supply data, well, they can see how it's being used. They can see how you can how the the value of it, the importance of it, and so on. So I think that I really like that about it. We've already got a question around how long did it take? So how long did it take you, Hannah, to create the respiratory model? There's a question.
No, it's a good question. I think firstly, I would say I've been learning to use system dynamics with Douglas and Stacey. So a lot of mine has been training and learning how to use both the software and how to even approach system dynamics in the first place. The second thing that takes the longest time is, as I'm sure you can all appreciate, getting people in a room and having conversations and trying to ask those questions about how a service is run. The actual building of it, I'm sure once I've reach Douglas's levels of experience, could be done relatively quickly. It's having those conversations and that feedback that takes the longest amount of time. So we started this piece of work in January. We've finished the stage that it's up to at the moment. We reached in April. There's a lot more that could be done with it yet, but yeah, I think very dependent on who you're working with as to how long it takes and perhaps how much documentation and how much intelligence and reporting that already is around that service. So for some of these, it was somebody going and looking in a paper diary and trying to count back in the weeks and suggest how many referrals they might potentially have per week, because that intelligence just wasn't available. So I think, yeah, it could contrast.
Yeah, so one of my questions was around sort of the did you have to collect new data? It doesn't necessarily have to be new data. It could just be that data exists, but it's in someone's diary, you know, and that's just okay. That's really helpful. So Chen Yu, you've got your hand up. What's your question?
Thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you so much, Douglas and Hannah. It's very, very interesting model and approach. I think it can be used very widely in many service area. However, with the limited time, I found it is quite hard to understand the methodology and particularly how to replicate it in the service area we selected in future. And my question is mainly around, yes, I hope you don't mind if I reach out to you for your advice and how to use it in practice in future. I hope you don't mind if I reach out. My second question is around the software. You mentioned about a specific software used for building up this model. Yeah. How much it costs? I think is the biggest hurdle for the system. You have to persuade people to purchase a new software in order to build the model.
I think at this point it would be worth hearing from Stacey from the strategy unit, because Stacey can give you some useful information about opportunities to use the software and learn.
Yeah, we're going to do another huddle that will show you another system dynamics model, the social care model that we've been working on, and also introduce a training course that we're hoping to start in September. And that is not just a course, that is also project support to help you along with building your own model. We're just working on the flyer for that at the moment, so there will be more news on that at the next huddle. Licenses wise, we did the work with Hannah initially on a training license, which was for 6 months we paid for, and it was about £900 for the training license. The perpetual license that you can buy, I think, is around about £2,000, but I'd have to check because it depends on the conversion rate between US dollars and English money. But that then means you've got a forever license for Stella, and you have to then buy in, if you want it, the maintenance costs on top of that, if you want annual maintenance. Yeah. There are other pieces of software as well that we've done courses on in the past at the strategy unit that are maybe open to you, which things like Silico. The other open source one I know about is Insight Maker. So there are other softwares to do system dynamics. We just prefer Stella because a lot of the hard work's been done for us in a commercial piece of software. It makes it much easier to learn it as well to begin with if a lot of that's done. There is the beginnings of doing it in open source, but it's not quite at the same visual level for us to engage with our stakeholders. So we still prefer the kind that have got the visual interface, so that it makes having those conversations in a meeting with the people who are actually part of the service, with the operational managers, clinicians, so much easier. So that's why we went for Stellar for this.
Thank you so much, Stacey. I'm looking forward for the training information sending out. Thank you.
Yeah, look out for that, because it's
Yeah.
I mean, that's for you, Tanya, and everybody else here, because I'm really looking forward to that training. We're approaching it in a slightly different way, and it's sort of going to be a significant training package and support package for a number of analysts in the system. So it's something to watch out for, and we can give you some more details later. So has that answered your question on the that you had, Jenny?
Yes, perfect.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
Now
Thank
I
you.
do know that somebody else had their hand up, which was Russell, but I can't see him now. So I don't know, Russell, do you still have a question? If not, I have another one on.
It's Cameron, actually. Hi.
All right,
Thank
okay.
you.
Hi, Cameron.
Thanks for some great presentations, Douglas and Hannah. I just had a thought on Hannah's presentation. That was the impact of telecare bit, where we assumed greater capacity per nurse as a result of telecare being introduced. So I just wondered whether within that model there's potential to actually build a model of the telecare, because I don't know whether this is something you just switch on, or whether you have to train staff, for example, or make investments. Could you model, for example, slightly lower increased productivity as a result of telecare because you're introducing a new system? So would that potentially be another model that you would feed in very similarly to the staff model for the main service? That was a question I had.
Great question. Yeah, exactly that. So I didn't get time
Yes.
to go through some of that telehealth model that we built, but the point that we're hoping to build all of these little models, and then you build your TAP and you link everything together, because there's obviously going to be an impact on the existing telehealth services if you were to introduce them to a new area. But yeah, absolutely.
Okay, yeah, brilliant, thank you. And kind of related to that really is there sort of dangers in this kind of modelling where you're making assumptions about what staff can do, etc. So presumably behind the scenes there's lots of conversations with people who are producing the service, who are doing the job, because, you know, if you present to someone a model and say, oh, we're introducing telecare, this will, you know, at a stroke improve productivity, maybe you would want to have the conversations with people first about introducing it and what that might entail, etc. So presumably you'd have to involve others in producing that kind of model. Is that fair enough? Yeah. I
would strongly agree with that. In fact, quite often in my experience, people come up with ideas for new service developments where they make perhaps over-optimistic projections about what the impact might be, and they've failed to take account of some of the unintended consequences of what they're planning. And it's a more likely possibility that the model would point out various other issues that surround the implementation that makes people think, actually, I'm not exactly sure that it will happen like that. Perhaps if we have less of this, we'll have more of that, or people will come in another way, whatever it might be. So actually, what we didn't really have time to explain today is how iterative the method is, that it involves. You got a flavour of that from Hannah, that it involves a conversation between the modeler or the analyst and the operations and strategy people, and it enables people to be more explicit about sharing their thinking and pointing things out. So it's really for that reason that you would use the method. It's very unlikely that somebody would develop a model and therefore say, therefore you must do this, and that's the end of the discussion. It's just the beginning.
Brilliant, thank you. That's really useful to know. Thanks.
That's great. Sorry, Cameron. I'm not the first person to get your first name and second name the wrong way around.
No, don't worry. It's because the way the IT displays my name. So yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you.
Oh, thanks.
No problem.
Blame someone else. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault. Thanks, Cameron. So I got a question here for all of you. So somebody's asking, what are the main differences between system dynamics and discrete event simulation modelling? Oh, there's a question. Who wants to take that one?
Stacey.
Go on, I'll field that one because I do a bit of both. So system dynamics is more of a strategic, higher level, long-term view, it will, the sort of results that we're seeing from the system dynamics model will show you the, as Hannah was describing, the change over time, and you'll see sort of estimates of average numbers of staff that you need and things like that. The difference to discrete event simulation is that you look in much more operational detail, so you can be strategically operational, if you like, with DES, and that lets you take into account the variation in time that some activities take, particularly when you've got a sequence of activities. That variation that an activity takes can mean that waiting times then start to stack up and you don't catch up on yourself, and averages don't average out. So it will let you see things like how many staff you should have on at particular times of the day and things like that. So both techniques are simulations. There are actually hybrid models which combine both system dynamics and DES together into a single model, and you can then have the best of both worlds, if you like, in that way. And the technique, which one you use, would depend very much on the question and the subsequent questions that you think that the question that your audience has, as to which technique you would pick to use. Okay. Does that help?
Yeah, no, that's really helpful.
No,
so, no, that's great. So can you just give us an example of when you would use a DES?
So DES, I would look at things like if you want to know the variation in waiting times that patients might have to have going through a system. And again, if it's similar to system dynamics in that if you're making changes to a system, you might want to use DES to look at those. You would use it for rotoring, for looking at how many people you should have on at different times of the day, the balance between different staffing. You can also do some of that in system dynamics, but at a higher level. So it's more for planning longer term.
Okay, no, that's really helpful.
Douglas, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes. I mean, I think I should make it clear I don't do discrete event simulation, so I'm not really qualified to describe its capabilities and limitations. But I think there is quite an overlap in issues that could be explored using either method, and then there are some that are more obviously system dynamics and some that are more obviously discrete event. I think maybe one of the differences might be that in discrete event simulation, perhaps people are particularly interested in the impact of variation, and in system dynamics, people are perhaps more interested in the causes of things and as to why you've got variation in the first place, and possibly that the variation comes from some kind of feedback loop that's happening inside the system. For example, you've got a target that as you reach it, you've got a limit. As you reach it, people's behavior change, and then the line comes down again. So so they're complementary, and it's clear to me that that the strategy unit, and Stacey kind of represents this, looks at multiple methods and brings different methods together. So I don't think there's any worry about the wrong kind of tool being recommended for the wrong job. Yeah.
There are certainly instances where there's an overlap where you could use it, and in that case, I would suggest using whichever tool you're more comfortable with, because it's better to do a model well than to try and move it into something that you're not comfortable using. Yeah, it's just that difference between DES tracks individuals through a system and SD sees it more as a continuous flow.
Yeah. Okay. Now, or maybe one that you got a license for. But hey, that's the one I'm going to go for. That's really helpful. Thanks for that differentiation. Yeah, that's great. So there is just one final quick question before I sort of draw to a close. We're doing very well, guys. So the final question really is, so do you have any, it's probably for Hannah really, I guess. So do you have any tips really? This is a powerful technique, isn't it? And I can see that you're enjoying using it, and you're enjoying sort of having those results. But do you have any tips for anybody who's thinking about using an SD model in their work? They're thinking about starting a project. Have you learned anything? Okay, here we go. What mistakes? What went wrong, and what would you do next time? What would you do differently next time? What are your top tips?
Well, I didn't make any mistakes because I was working with Douglas. So
Wow.
no, I think
Go,
that
Douglas.
actually would come off the back of some of the questions that have just been asked, which is really making sure that you understand why you're using system dynamics before you start using it, because that influences the kind of questions and the kind of input that you then get back from the stakeholders that you're working with.
Okay.
And I think really spending time nailing down what those questions are and what you want to represent in the model. You don't just launch in and work through the steps 1 to 10 and then you've got your model at the end. I think there's a lot more involved in that planning in the first place than there might be in some other techniques. And I think that's the bit that I guess I've gained experience with over the months. I might not necessarily have known at the start, but that would be my tip, would be look around for previous examples and make sure you really understand.
Yeah, so do your planning, do your preparation. Yeah.
Can I add a top tip to that, actually?
You can state them, and then as soon as you've done that, you must tell us
Really
about the next
quickly,
huddle.
get used to letting go, get used to that iterative approach and
Yeah.
showing people things that aren't quite finished as well.
And
Hard for analysts.
absolutely share what you're doing and how you're doing it with others. Don't go off into a dark room and
it's not about that, is it? This is about sharing.
Unbox some software, look at the help menu and think that you build them up. So share what you're doing, and I think NHS England aspire to get some kind of community of practice going for people who are using this, and I think that's possibly the most encouraging development I've seen in recent years. So talk about it and discuss it and learn from others. Share what you're doing and learn what they're doing. Learn from what they're doing and enjoy.
Fantastic, enjoy. Yeah, what a way to finish. Okay, well we've just tipped over 12 o'clock. So thank you ever so much for coming today, everybody, and thank you for your our presenters. Wonderful. I hope to see you again, and I will see you again in a couple of weeks. So some of you. So enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you again in a couple of weeks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.